Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I'd like to talk a bit about our politicians because things aren't going terribly well. Brexit is an absolute disaster, and I think most people realise that now. You have to be pretty stupid to believe that Brexit was a good idea. The only arguments in favour of Brexit at the moment appear to be it would have been worse if we stayed in the EU, or it's all going to be better in 20 or 30 years' time, or whatever. Speaking personally, I'm not going to be here to see what the consequences are in 30 years' time, no matter how good they may be. But I want to start by talking really about the four people who are responsible for us having gone ahead with Brexit, and they are, of course, Farage, Cameron, Johnson and Corbyn. Farage is he's a bag of wind, isn't he? He's somebody who loves the sound of his own voice. He's a very good speaker. He's very quick-witted, gift of the gab, I think they call it, and I think he's the sort of pub bore who would always talk louder than anybody else, and so on. And he seemed to get a following because he was like his friend Trump and like Johnson. He's a good performer, and people find him entertaining. And he, of course, started to worry Cameron because he was getting such a good following when he was the leader of UKIP back in 2015, prior to the referendum. In addition, of course, there are all the right-wing crazies in the Conservative Party who were also worrying Cameron. You know the people I'm talking about: Bill Cash and John Redwood and Peter Bone and Andrew Bridgen and Peter Lillen. All these people who've had very good lives, and they never had to pay university tuition fees. They didn't even have to pay accommodation fees, and they came out of university and they all got jobs very easily because there were plenty of jobs in those days, and they were all able to buy houses at very low prices, houses which now will have gone up and up and up, and they'll all own properties worth millions by now. And yet all these men, it's almost all men, wanted to deny younger generations all the benefits they've had by taking us recklessly out of the EU. So between them, these right-wing crazies in the Conservative Party and Farage frightened Cameron, who then made a terrible mistake in deciding to hold a referendum. Cameron, I always thought he was all right, actually, but I was obviously fooled like everybody else, because it turned out, as we found out with this Greensill thing, that he's a money grabber like everybody else. Why somebody with so much money and so much privilege should want to risk his reputation in order to make a few million more by using his contacts to pester the Chancellor and the business secretaries and other people. 45 different messages he sent trying to get business for Greensill, which of course subsequently went bankrupt when all this stuff came out. So Cameron was very, very disappointing. Then of course there's Johnson. I've said plenty about him. Johnson is totally self-obsessed. Everything revolves around him. He's only interested in himself. He's dishonest. Nobody even questions that. He is absolutely dishonest, and he's incompetent, utterly incompetent. You really look at the way he's been handling affairs, and look at COVID and the very high number of deaths we've got compared with other countries, and look at that's partly because of his dithering and so on, and look at this business with Afghanistan. He's just utterly incompetent, very, very lazy. He seems to like spending time at Chequers or else going around factories putting on different high-vis outfits and making wisecracks. He's not a prime minister. I mean, he's already a utter failure. And then, of course, there's Corbyn. Now, it was unfortunate that at a time when we were making probably the most important decision as a nation we would make ever, the leader of the opposition was somebody who was totally unelectable, somebody who would never really say whether he was pro or against. Everybody believed he was all for leaving the EU, but he never really put his heart into fighting to remain. and he made the stupid decision to agree to an election in 2019, and which we all know he lost dramatically. Corbyn would never have been elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. A guy who's friends with Chavez and Hamas, and a guy who questioned whether or not the Russians were actually guilty of the poisoning of the Schrippels in Salisbury. A guy running a party which was clearly becoming anti-Semitic was never ever going to get elected. So the four of those gave us Brexit. And so we now have this government with Johnson in charge, and what a second-rate lot. I mean, really, really second-rate lot. As far as the top three are concerned, Patel, I've made another separate video about her. I mean, I think she's probably the most unpleasant woman I have ever seen in politics at any level in this country. A really, truly, deeply unpleasant woman. Then there's Rishi Sunak. He seems perfectly decent. He seems a very clever guy, but he's immensely, immensely wealthy. This is a guy who's a multi-millionaire. His wife her family are billionaires. I don't believe we should hold that against him, but when he's taking away the £10 supplement to the universal allowance, the £20 a week, in the end of next month, I mean, that's pretty cruel. I mean, how can somebody who is as rich as he is understand how a woman with a couple of children living in a council flat in Sheffield, what £20 a week means to her? You know, it might mean whether she can give the children a decent meal 3 days a week or 5 days a week. It might mean whether she can pay the electricity bill or not, or the rent. And there are so many people, all these people in food banks and so on. And that does seem to, I think that's a really cruel thing to do, especially when you think that they've spent these billions, literally billions, on test and trace, and we're paying £1,000 to £6,000 a day to consultants, and yet £20 a week to really, really poor people. It seems to me very cruel, and I think whilst Sunak is quite popular now, and I think when Johnson goes, which I don't think is going to be very long before he does go, when he does go, Sunak seems to be the favourite at the moment. But I suspect that as time goes by, when the effects of the ending of furlough and when further effects of Brexit become clear, he's probably not going to be quite as popular as he might be at the moment. Then there's the Foreign Secretary, isn't there? Well, what do you say about Dominic Raab? I mean, a man who goes off, Foreign Secretary goes off on holiday and stays on holiday knowing that the Taliban are rampaging throughout Afghanistan, and it's going to be a bigger story for years. And he doesn't want to make phone calls, or he doesn't want his holiday disturbed. It's said now that he was called back on the Friday, but in fact stayed on holiday until the Monday, during which time so much was going on in Afghanistan, this absolute chaos that we're seeing. So really, he's a clever guy. You know, he's been to Oxford, he's been to Cambridge, he's extremely clever. He seems to, in his general demeanour, seems to manage to hide his cleverness, but he's not really up to the job, is he? And then there's the rest of them. I mean, have you ever seen such a second-rate cabinet? Can you? I mean, it's just incredible. You look at Jenrick, Dodgy Bob. I mean, just read his Wikipedia page. It's like a crib sheet. It's just one dodgy thing after another. Absolutely dodgy. There's Gavin, isn't there? Gavin Williamson, sacked by May for being for allegedly leaking matter to the newspapers. Now he's Education Secretary. He did a great job there, hasn't he? All this exam fiasco after another. Seems absolutely gormless. Look at Liz Truss, running around all over the world trying to get deals. She said, because she was a passionate Remainer, as most of the cabinet are, she said, and I'll read it to you, just before the referendum, she said, Leave cannot name one country we would get a better deal with if we left the EU. She's rushing around trying to get better deals. She ain't going to get them. All she's got so far is a miserable deal with Australia, which vastly benefits Australia and which will damage our farming industry. Now she's off trying to get a deal in New Zealand because she thinks that will help get a deal with CPTPP. These are the countries that are as far away from the UK as you can possibly get, so that in the time of global warming, we're all going to be shipping goods to and from countries as far away as you can go, as opposed to supplying or dealing with, trading with those evil, wicked people across the channel in the EU who we just hate so much. And there's the other dross, isn't there? There's Grant Shapps and George Eustace, and there's Theresa Coffey, Robert Buckland. I mean, they're all. None of these is a sort of serious politician. They're all just second raters. And of course, the absolute the cherry on the cake is Lord Gormless himself, our famous Brexit negotiator, the man who negotiated a deal which was signed by himself and by Johnson, and within 6 months was writing in the newspapers that the EU were being run unreasonable because they wanted us to abide by the terms of the deal he'd negotiated and signed. I mean, just Gormless doesn't even do it. And you kind of begin to despair about politicians in general. You think, if this cabinet, if they're the best, I mean, what are the rest of them like? How bad can the rest of them be? And I watched the Afghanistan debate on Wednesday, and it was very interesting. I watched a few debates and parliamentary debates, and I think I was struck overall by how very poor and lacklustre most backbenchers are. Pretty dull, not very good speakers, not very coherent. There was a lot of repetition because you can only say so much about the situation in Afghanistan, and there were maybe 50 speeches, so an awful lot of repetition. But I don't mean to condemn backbenchers if they're dull, not very good speakers. Debating in the House is quite a small part of being an MP. The important things are dealing with your constituents and dealing with committees and all sorts of other matters. And I'm quite sure that most of these MPs are very dedicated, very hard-working, and very conscientious. So I'm not criticising them, other than the fact that they're not very good performers in Parliament. But in amongst all these speeches, and particularly the earlier speeches, you saw people, the sort of people that we used to admire as politicians, people who you can respect, people with integrity. And it was quite reassuring, really. On the Tory side, the three soldiers, Tobias Ellwood, Johnny Mercer and Tom Tugendhat, they all gave fantastic speeches. They're all former army officers, and you could see that these are men of dignity, of integrity, of honesty, men you could respect. And you knew that none of these guys was doing dodgy PPE deals for their mates. None of these guys was going to come into Parliament and lie. And you think if only people like that were in government, the whole country would be so much better, so much more honest. Of course, I don't suppose that any of them would I'm sure they're all thoroughly ashamed and embarrassed by Johnson and his shambles government. I don't suppose they'd even consider being in government. But in another world, they might be. And those are the sort of people, I think, that are sort of politicians. You don't remember Dominic Raab and so on, and people like that they'd have principles. And on the other side, I mean, there are so many politicians you could say the same about. Yvette Cooper, Caroline Lucas, Ian Blatchford, Rachel Reeves, and two of my favourites are Wes Streeting and Lisa Nandy, who gave an extremely good speech in winding up the debate. These are people who you could trust and you could feel had the interests of the country at heart instead of being on the make or being incompetent. And I just hope that the time will come when we return to that sort of quality of politician in government, but it might be a while. Keir Starmer, who I've never spoken about before, but he's obviously a very, very decent, clever, nice guy, a really nice guy. But he does have a problem. He does have a problem in that in this age of social media and 24 hours news and people having very short attention spans, you really have to have some sort of charisma. This is why Farage and Trump and Johnson are so good, because they have, like them or not, you can hate these people, detest them if you like, but they all have charisma. They all draw a crowd. If they're on the television, you stop and watch them, what they're saying. Whereas Keir Starmer is what many people would describe as a little bit dull. He doesn't really excite people. And I think that's a big problem. I think he's head and shoulders way above Johnson in terms of integrity and probably of ability. I'm sure of ability. He would be a much better Prime Minister than Johnson. But he's got to get there. And I think with his current demeanour and I don't know, the way he speaks, he has to do something to he has to show a bit more emotion, I think. You know, every week we see Prime Minister's Question Time, and it's the same formula. It's got very boring now, and nobody takes any notice because it doesn't matter. It's completely meaningless. What happens is Starmer will get up and he'll ask a question. It'll be a well thought out, loyally sort of question, which, if answered honestly, would put the government in a spot. It would be difficult to answer. You get up and ask this measured question. Immediately Johnson will jump up and he'll start blustering and ranting away. He never answers the question. He'll talk about something completely different, and then he'll start insulting the Labour Party and particularly Keir Starmer. And this happens time after time after time. Immediately after that, Keir Starmer gets up, asks another question, nice measured question, and the same thing again. Johnson jumps up and just takes no notice whatsoever, just makes a fool of himself and everybody else. And that ain't going to work. If I were Starmer, I would go for personal insults against Johnson. I would set out to try and embarrass him. I would use sarcasm, try and ridicule him, because he's very vain. He's very keen to be liked, and he doesn't like being laughed at. The one occasion I think I seem to remember when Keir Starmer did say something which did actually resonate a bit was when after Johnson kept calling Starmer Captain Hindsight, and I think Starmer called him major mistake or something, or major, I can't remember what it was, but he came back with a similar retort, and that did get picked up. But I think that's what you need. I think you've got to actually attack, but it's no good attacking in a measured, polite way. You've got to go for him. And I just hope that Keir Starmer does that, I think it's really important. The other thing which is important, of course, is that the Labour Party has got a huge uphill battle to win the next election, and there's only one way they can really, really improve their chances, and that is to go into some sort of alliance, some sort of progressive alliance with other parties. It can only be temporary, it can be just for the election to get rid of the Tories, but they have to do that, really. I think otherwise it's going to be very difficult. But there's a lot of resistance to this, isn't there? There's this, I heard John MacDonald a few weeks ago, he was being interviewed, and they said, what do you think about going into an alliance with one of the other parties? He said, oh, no. I think we should stand on what we stand for. Everybody knows what we stand for, and no, I think we should stand on our own beliefs and our own manifesto. And you thought, it's like saying, yes, everybody knows that what we stand for we lose on time after time after time, but we're going to go on losing. Rather do that than actually compromise for a short period just to win an election. So I think that's pretty important. But as things are, I don't know. It seems to me that things are going to change a lot in the next 3 or 4 months. I think the effects of Brexit are going to go on being felt more and more. The ending of the £20 a week supplementary payments to universal credit, and the increase in electricity prices, gas prices, and inflation in general, which is going to be more and more, and the shortage of food in the shops, and the problems with distribution are all going to take their toll. And I don't know how much longer Johnson can carry on. His method of governing seems to be just to wing it, see what happens, and then you'll always get away with blustering a bit afterwards. And because he's so popular, he still is popular. Because he's so popular, he'll get through it and get away with it. But I think sooner or later people are going to start saying, we've had enough of this clown, we've had enough of this idiot, this self-obsessed idiot running the country. But anyway, that's my take for the moment. And if you watched this far, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, bye-bye.